The Don is formed from two rivers, the east and west branches that meet about 7 kilometers north of Lake Ontario while flowing southward into the lake. The area below the confluence is known as the Lower Don, and the area above as the Upper Don. The Don is also joined at the confluence by a third major branch, the Taylor-Massey Creek. Human settlement can be traced back as far as 7,000 years ago. Slate tools left behind by the indigenous peoples were discovered in 1886 during road building near Riverdale Park East. 1787 saw the problematic Toronto Purchase. Believing the purchase to be a rental of the area and not the release of their rights to the land, the Mississaugas surrendered most of the land that would become York and then Toronto to the British. The Mississaugas opened a land claim settlement process with the Canadian government in 1986. In 2010, the claim was settled in favor of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation for $145 million. John Graves Simcoe was a British Army general and the first Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada. He wanted to make the area a British colony and decided to disregard the river's indigenous name of Woonsocket, meaning the river coming back from the backburnt country. Instead, he called it the Don, after a stream in Yorkshire, England, where he came from. Edwards Gardens is in the Upper Don and is a former estate garden featuring annuals, roses, wildflowers, and an extensive rockery. It's located on Wilkett Creek, one of the tributaries of the Don River West Branch. The estate's title was once held by Alexander Milne, a Scottish weaver who settled there after the War of 1812 and then left in 1832. Although the property remained in the Milne family, it was left in neglect. The land and the woolen and sawmills that were on the property were bought by Rupert Edwards in 1944, and he created a magnificent garden. He sold the property to the municipality of Metro Toronto in 1955 to become a public park, and it has become known as Edwards Gardens since then. In 1795, the first of many mills along the Don was erected at Todmorden Mills on Pottery Road, quickly followed by a paper mill and a brewery. These industries used the river to power their plants, and the industrialization of the valley began, together with pollution. Even up to the 1900s, the Don Valley was teeming with life and culture at its banks. Sewerage and stormwater improvements have improved water quality, and salmon have been seen in the Don again recently. The river was a place to swim in the hot summer months. Residents flocked to the Don River for a swim, perhaps at one of the river's bare-bottomed beaches. Some people vacation homes along the river. The river was a place to skate in the winter. The flow of ice down the Don caused the destruction of several early bridges and was one of the key components of the Don problem, which was a list of gripes and obstacles to industry that led to the dredging, straightening, and general taming of the river south of Winchester Street. In the fall of 1886, a team of workers led by Manning and MacDonald dug a 14 feet deep dogleg channel south from Winchester Street that sliced through the middle of several turns in the river. 5 small islands in the path of the channel were simply dug out. The sides of the new Don were piled with cedar, rock, elm, and white pine to ensure the banks remained stable. Most of the original course of the river was filled with material dug from the valley walls. The Don Valley Parkway was completed in the 1960s, proposed in 1954. It wouldn't be until 1961 that the parkway would open, forever changing the Don Valley. The hills of the valley were modified and other natural areas destroyed by the creation of the highway during the post-war boom in Toronto. The construction of the Don Valley Parkway had a huge and negative impact on the ecology of the valley. Despite the challenges of urbanization, the landscape of the Don River is slowly being regenerated and revitalized. Don Mills was the name given to a mixed-use neighborhood in Toronto. It was developed in the 1950s and 60s to be a self-supporting new town and was at the time located outside Toronto proper in the suburb of North York. Consisting of residential, commercial, and industrial sub-districts, it was planned and led by E.P. Taylor. The design was made by Macklin Hancock, who had studied town planning at Harvard University. In several ways, it became the blueprint for post-war suburban development in Toronto and contemporary residential neighborhoods. It is bounded by York Mills Road to the north, Canadian Pacific Railway to the south, Leslie Street to the west, and the Don Valley Parkway to the east. It is part of the federal and provincial electoral districts of Don Valley East and Toronto Electoral Ward 16. It is now completely absorbed into Toronto. Hurricane Hazel caused the Don River to flood the city. Nowadays, we know how the Don can flood in times of sudden rain, but in 1954, Hurricane Hazel forced the entire city underwater. The Metropolitan Toronto Regional Conservative Authority was created in the wake of the flood, and among its defining activities is the acquisition of ravine lands. All the properties in the ravines of the Don and its tributaries, most of which were badly damaged in the hurricane, were expropriated by the city. The ravines are now parklands, containing an extensive system of trails. These trails, or multi-use trails, are used by pedestrians, cyclists, inline skaters, and more. Some are parts of a bikeway network. Some are paved, some are not. Most provide access into Toronto's beautiful ravine system. The Don Valley Brickworks, now referred to as the Evergreen Brickworks, is a former quarry and industrial site located on the Don River Valley in Toronto. The Don Valley Brickworks operated for nearly 100 years and provided bricks used to construct many well-known Toronto landmarks, such as Casa Loma, Osgoode Hall, Massey Hall, and the Ontario Legislature. Since the closure of the original factory, the quarry has been converted into a city park, which includes a series of naturalized ponds, while the buildings have been restored and opened as an environmentally focused community and cultural center by Evergreen, a national charity dedicated to restoring nature in urban environments. On the 8th of July 2013, Toronto experienced the greatest amount of rainfall in a single day ever recorded in the city. A torrent of 126 millimeters of rain hit the ground, more than a whole month's average for July. The storm flooded roads, transit infrastructure, and basements. Waterways overflowing their banks created commuting chaos for thousands of residents. The rescue of hundreds of passengers stranded on a GO train from a Don River overflowing its banks emerged as one of the more dramatic scenes from the flood. Thousands went to bed that night without power. The growth of impervious surfaces and deforestation in the region over the past century further contributed to the severity of the flood. In the 19th century, outsiders mocked Toronto as Muddy York, and historic photographs from the time illustrate some truth to the moniker. In an age of wooden sidewalks and primitive roads, Toronto could be a mucky place. Many factors, new paving technology, a yearning to be modern, the growth of the automobile use along with parking lots, and of course, a wish for clean apparel have led to a paved urban environment. Thanks to the action of decision makers in the aftermath of Hazel, the flood of 2013 wasn't as severe as it might have been, but the total insurance claims for the flood were the highest ever recorded in Toronto. In total, the floods resulted in roughly $3.1 billion in claims paid out by Canada's property and casualty insurers. The crossing over the Don River at Queen Street was extremely important, as it was the route from Toronto to Kingston, from Upper Canada to Lower Canada. Early bridges were logs lashed together over a narrow part of the water. Since then, there have been a total of 3 bridges over the Don River on Queen Street. The first, a simple wood structure, was replaced by an ornate iron bridge in the 1800s. At the time, Queen Street crossed the Don from within the valley, requiring a level crossing with the rail tracks at its western end. The second bridge carried streetcar, automobile, and pedestrian traffic and was distinguished by light standards at each corner. In 1910, the second bridge was replaced by the high-level structure in use today. The Don Brewery, originally the Don Bridge Brewery and later the Davis Brewery, was one of the largest breweries in 19th century Toronto. It was located along the Don River in the Corktown neighborhood of Toronto, beside the Queen Street Bridge. Most of the buildings have been demolished and replaced by housing, but one ornate heritage building was preserved, first as a vinegar factory and now converted to condominiums. Gooderum and Worts was a Canadian distiller of alcoholic beverages. It was once one of the largest distillers in Canada. The company was merged in 1926 with Hiram Walker and Sons, and the merged firm was eventually sold to Allied Lyons in 1987. The company's distillery on the Toronto waterfront was closed in the 1990s, and the buildings dating from the 1860s were preserved and repurposed as an arts and entertainment district that is now called the Distillery District. In 1998, the Goodrum and Wirtz distillery was named one of the National Historic Sites of Canada. Initially, this was a grain mill founded in 1831 with a prominent windmill on the Toronto waterfront near the mouth of the Don River. The business prospered, processing grain from Ontario farmers and then shipping it out via the Port of Toronto. With a surplus of wheat, Goodrum expanded in 1837 into brewing and distilling, and soon this lucrative trade became the primary focus of the business. Under the control of William's son, George Goodrum, who lived 1830 to 1905, production increased to over 2 million gallons a year, half the entire spirits production of Canada. The distillery itself expanded, becoming one of Toronto's largest employers. The company gained a large share of the United States market during Prohibition, legally manufacturing it in Canada and then selling it to resellers who would smuggle it into the United States. Wetlands around the original mouth of the Don River were connected to a sandbar that is now the Toronto Islands. By the turn of the 20th century, this marsh had become seriously polluted from the upstream mills and from waste from the Goodrum's distillery. The city filled the area with landfill, devoted it to industrial purposes, made a port, and at the same time dug a channel to the west into Toronto Harbour to provide a much better outlet to the river through the delta that was forming in order to avoid flooding. The channel they dug is named after Edward Henry Keating, who lived 1844 to 1912, a city engineer who proposed the creation of the channel in 1893. Floating debris is washed down the Don. Composed largely of logs and dead wood, there is also an assortment of garbage that collects in the Keating Channel. At the moment, this material is contained with a floating boom across the channel. Soon, a containment facility will be built just north of the channel to manage this problem more efficiently. Villiers Island is a 22-hectare, that's to say 54-acre, area of Toronto Portlands, which is being converted to an island. The project is a part of the Portlands Flood Protection Project by Waterfront Toronto. To prevent flooding from the Don River, a new riverbed is being created to extend the river south and then westward into Toronto Harbour, providing a second outlet and a more natural mouth for the Don River. The new channel effectively creates the island, which is also bounded by the Keating Channel to the north and Toronto Harbour to the west. Mixed-use residential development is planned for Villiers Island. The new riverbed will be the primary outlet for the Don River. The Keating Channel will be retained as a secondary outlet if the need arises. There is also a third outlet called the Don Greenway, located at the southeast corner of Villiers Island. This is a spillway and wetland situated between the new river and the ship canal. If the new Don River cannot handle high water volumes, then that water would be allowed to flood the Don Greenway and flow into the shipping channel. This island lies on former industrial land, first created by silt from the river, then through landfill. Additional landfill would be used to raise the ground level by 2 meters to mitigate the very rare possibility of extraordinary flooding. Recent buildings are being demolished, heritage buildings moved and retained. Some industrial uses have been moved to the main shipping channel to the south. There are 4 new bridges providing 3 access points to Villiers Island. All bridges are built by Cherubini Bridges and Structures in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, at a total cost of $100 million. All 3 locations have provision for future streetcar services, which will be a future expansion of the proposed East Bayfront. All 4 bridges have the same aesthetic design, and each span has a curved steel dome designed by GIC Architecture of the Netherlands, rising over the road surface. The Portlands will be home to sustainable new communities that deliver affordable housing, job opportunities, along with renewed connections to the natural environment and the mouth of the Don. I go to my favorite place in Toronto, and I stand and I look at the water, I look at the Don River, and I think about the continuity of life and how the river rolls on, oblivious of all the petty upsets in our lives. Enjoy the Don River.